I want to welcome you all to this Soul Repair Center webinar titled Memorial Day and Military Moral Injury. How might faith leaders and communities respond? My name is Nancy Ramsay. I'm the director of the Soul Repair Center at Brite Divinity School on the campus of TCU in Fort Worth, Texas. The center provides resources for religious leaders and professional caregivers who support veterans and their families affected by moral injury. Our mission includes offering free monthly webinars that further that mission with a focus on topics that have been inadequately covered or not yet addressed. We are grateful for the support of the Shea Center on Moral Injury at Volunteers of America, which co-sponsors these webinars. Memories of engaging in war and military interventions forever shape the lives of veterans of such conflicts, the families of those who love them, and especially the families whose loved ones died in service. Active duty personnel also deeply understand the toll of conflict. Such grief is palpable and enduring. How could faith communities in the Abrahamic traditions recognize the National Day of Remembrance we call Memorial Day in ways that acknowledge the moral complexity of war and the costliness of peace? How may recognition of the costliness of war in services preceding that national holiday be at once a comfort to those who mourn and a reminder of the centrality of peace in these faith traditions? These questions will shape this webinar, which is led by military chaplains whose lives and service are shaped by Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Our webinar will proceed with opportunities for each of the chaplains to share reflections, followed by an opportunity for their shared conversation. At the close of that first hour, we'll turn to the questions that you pose for them via the chat. Our chat monitor today is Kyle Fauntleroy, a development officer at Brite and a retired captain in the United States Navy Chaplain Corps. Kyle is a founding member of the National Advisory Board for the Soul Repair Center. He will prioritize the questions you direct to him for our panelists and share those questions with me. We're also grateful to Sam McAllister at VOA, who is managing this production. Our panelists include Chaplain Emily Rosenzweig, Lieutenant Commander, U.S. Navy, and Rabbi Rosenzweig began her service as an active duty Navy chaplain in 2012. She was the first recipient of the Navy Chaplain Corps Captain Joshua Goldberg Award for achievement in facilitation for those outside her faith group. Prior to commissioning, Rabbi Rosenzweig served a congregation in Columbus, Ohio for 5 years. She's a graduate of Hebrew Union College, Jewish Institute of Religion in Los Angeles, where she also earned an MA in Jewish education. She's now serving as a chaplain in the Marine Corps. She's a member of the Soul Repair Center Advisory Board. Retired United States Navy chaplain Captain Lyman is a ministerial member of the Presbyterian Church USA. He recently retired as the executive director and endorsing official of Presbyterian Federal Chaplaincies and previously served as executive director of the Military Chaplains Association. While serving with the MCA, Chaplain Smith helped develop the Veteran Military Friendly Congregation Ministry, which continues to support congregations today. He is an important advisor for the Soul Repair Center. Chaplain Ibraheem Raheem, Colonel, U.S. Army, is the director of the School for Spiritual Care and CPE, the Graduate School U.S. Army Institute for Religious Leadership. Chaplain Raheem has served the Army in several roles. Initially, he served as a nurse in Germany. In 1999, he began his service as a chaplain. He is deployed in Korea, Iraq, where he served 2 tours, and Germany. Prior to his current role at the Army Institute, he was the chaplain at the Walter Reed National Military Medical Center. He holds a BS in Health Sciences, an MBA in Public Management, and an MA in Religious Practice, as well as a DMin with emphasis in Addictions Ministry. He's an associate member of the Association of Muslim Chaplains. Ibraheem is also a member of the Soul Repair Center Advisory Board. Retired U.S. Navy Chaplain Commander Glenda Jennings Harrison, originally to be on this webinar, needed to withdraw from the webinar due to caregiving responsibilities for members of her family, and we appreciate very much that Captain Smith could join us. As we turn to our presenters, please remember that all of our webinars are posted as links on this site and at the VOA YouTube channel. Ordinarily, the link is available within 10 days. And now I invite us to turn our attention to our presenters.
I'm assuming that was my cue, Nancy, to get going. There we go. All right. So thank you, Nancy, and everyone at Brite and at VOA, and to Sam for running the slides, which I'll call for in a moment, and for all of our participants who remembered to actually come on to the webinar today. I can't be the only one who sometimes signs up for a webinar and then remembers 20 minutes into it, oh, I meant to do that webinar. So thank you all for being here. I'll speak today about Memorial Day in the Jewish liturgical context. Sam, you can throw up the first slide there. The question initially led me to think about the service that we have several times throughout the year, which is already a memorial service. It's generally called Yizkor or Yizkor. The actual name is Hazkarat Hanashamot, remembrance of the souls or the individuals. It includes a collection of psalms and other Putim liturgical prayer poems, and then also sort of the crescendo of the service is the saying or singing or chanting of the prayer El Malei Rachamim, which calls on God who is full of compassion. I've included in the slide here the El Malei Rachamim for service members who have died in service. That it comes from the Jewish Welfare Board, Jewish Chaplain Council's prayer book, published 2014-ish. And you'll see as you read through the text of the prayer, it asks God to remember those who have died. And there are similar versions of El Malei Rachamim, both for individuals. So one might say this for a parent, for a child, for a friend, and also for groups of people. For instance, last week was the Jewish Yom HaShoah, the Day of Remembrance for those who died in the Holocaust, and there is a version of El Malei Rachamim for those particular people. This, the one that we have on the screen here, would be offered at a Memorial Day gathering or a Memorial Day ceremony. We've also used it, I've used it as part of the Yizkor service at Yom Kippur, which is one of the times of the year in which Yizkor is said. And the way that we, in a military setting, include that is that we offer first for our families, those who are mourning, again, a parent or a spouse or something along those lines. And then we turn our attention as a community to those who have died. We actually read two lists of names for memorial. In the services that I've led, I do first all service members who have died in the past year in service, I should say. This was made much more feasible to do because the DoD was publishing, the Department of Defense was publishing names of fallen service members as those names were being made public. And so it was possible to compile a list of all of the service members killed in a year. I should say killed either through combat or through training accidents, for instance. And the Jewish Welfare Board collected those names, at least, so I've been in since 2012. Since 2012, they've been collecting those names each year for with the purpose of them being read on Yom Kippur during the Yizkor service. The second group of names that we would read would be all of the Jewish service members who were killed during the global war on terror. So starting from September 11th, 2001, and moving forward, there are about 60 names on that list. clearly that's much more feasible to do in a Jewish setting than in a setting of another faith group, but we included both of those names, and to include not only the names, but the day of their death, and then also the age and hometown when that was available information. And the reason that we do that, that I chose to do that, that's how the list is presented, so I guess JWB chose to do it that way too, was to remind or to distinguish, I guess, would be a better way of thinking about it, separate, maybe that would be a better way of thinking about it, from the general idea that troops have died, or boots on the ground, or soldiers writ large, but specifically to call a name, to remember that this is an individual, and an individual in relationship to other individuals. And I will say that I've not had the case where there has been a particular person who knew somebody on those lists, but I will say that, for instance, reading the Yizkor list, the Yom Kippur following the wrecks of, or the casualties of the McCain and the Fitzgerald, so this was probably 2015-ish, 2016-ish, to read those sailors' names at a Navy chapel amongst a group of sailors and Marines in this case, it was very powerful, so that it was almost as if we knew them. And so the idea here, just to summarize, this idea of Yizkor is to remember the individual, to recount how they might have been in relationship with the person offering the prayers, and then also to call upon the person's memory to be a blessing for life moving forward. Some may be familiar with the response when one, or the way one talks about somebody who is deceased in a Jewish context would be to say, may that person's memory be a blessing. And so in thinking about how a fallen fellow Marine, fallen fellow sailor, soldier, airman, Coast Guardsman, might be, how they might be memorialized. One of the ways to do that, at least in a Jewish setting, that I would do as a Jewish chaplain, would be to think about what is it about that person that one would like to take forward into the world. And so that's the first thing. And on the very sort of individual notion. The second thing that the idea of observing Memorial Day brought up was that we have a pretty clear contemporary observance of Memorial Day in a Jewish setting, which is Yom HaZikaron in Israel. So Sam, if you'll push forward the slide to the next, there we go. So I will also note that today is actually Yom HaZikaron. I doubt that was known when this date was chosen for this webinar, but it works in some way. Yom HaZikaron is a civil holiday in Israel. It is observed generally with, how should we say, somber mood in everything from what music is on the radio to television programming to school functions and to communal memorial gatherings. And so among the liturgy, which is decided by the Israeli rabbinate, among the liturgy is Psalm 9 and Psalm 144, both for the themes of Psalm 9 begins, one of the ways of translating the beginning of the psalm is upon the death of a son. And so that's, as most, throughout history, most of those killed in combat have been men. That's obviously an appropriate theme there. And then Psalm, it says 44 on the slide, it should say 144. My apologies. Psalm 144 includes the idea that God girds us or equips us for war. And so that's, again, that's one of the themes there. But overall, the holiday is, let's say, addressed, the observance is addressed in the image of David's lament. That is the section from 2 Samuel, chapter 1, in which, after which David learns of Saul and Jonathan's deaths. I would note, just in rereading this in preparation for the webinar, that David learns of Saul's death not from official notification or chain of communication through the way, but from the person who actually was there. That's a whole, I think, another layer to this. There's lots of layers here, as one might imagine. But the statement, question, exclamation, how have the mighty fallen? That notion of we were strong in arms, we were strong in strategy, we were strong in mission, in training, and yet even someone who is well trained, well equipped, well prepared might lose their life in battle. And so that idea there, both communally or nationally in the case of Israel, but then also if you look at verse 21 there, and I did pick the juicy bits, but in verse 21, the idea that on the hills of Gilboa, there would be no life-giving, no life anymore, no dew or rain on you or your bountiful fields. That idea that life stops when there is a death for those who mourn that person. And that's David's expression here. Another reason that this is taken as a theme for the holiday in Israel. And then towards the bottom in verse 26, David speaks of his love for Jonathan, which I think in the context of comrades in arms, fellow soldiers, Marines, sailors, airmen, that idea that the loss of whether it's a platoon mate or a squad mate or a squad leader or something along those lines, I think that the loss of that person, the relationship with that person, someone who is fighting alongside you, is unlike any other relationship, including the one of a spouse. And so the notion of David's words here is that there is something about the fellowship of warriors that needs to be honored if we are truly to honor our war dead, is the idea there. The other thing I like about this, and I hope they will let me keep my rabbinic ordination when I say this, but Saul is not a perfect person. I'm pretty sure I remember that from Bible class. And he is nonetheless remembered as mighty. And he has all sorts of issues. He nonetheless is remembered as a warrior and a fighter and swifter than eagles and stronger than lions. And I think that notion that one can be a human being with foibles and challenges and illnesses and demons and et cetera, and still be recalled with love and with not over glorification, not he was a hero no matter what, but he nonetheless served and fought like a hero. I think that nuance in David's words here in 2 Samuel, I think could also be very helpful for those who are struggling perhaps with the reality of, listen, there are soldiers and Marines and sailors and airmen and Coast Guardsmen who are jerks and who are small-minded and who are not very pleasant to be around. Nonetheless, in a time of war, in a setting of war, in a setting of preparing for war, that fellowship of warriorhood, I think it should be still valued and still appreciated, while still recognizing the human being underneath. And to make somebody solely a hero and without their humanity is unfair. And to ignore the heroism because of their humanity would be unfair. And so to me, the notion here that David laments his friend and his challenger in Saul, he was the challenger of, the two of them were in challenge with each other, I guess. All of those things I think hold true and are true to the experience of the service member. And as we look forward to observing Memorial Day, I would ask that we all keep that in mind, the humanity of the individuals involved and the relationships involved and the complexity thereof. I forgot to look, Nancy, at the starting time. You said to keep a clock nearby. I have no idea how long I've been talking. That is essentially my notes, except to say that if anyone is interested, the Jewish Welfare Board does offer Memorial Day specific resources on the website that I hoped was on the slide, but it looks like it wasn't. I can add it to the chat. After my time is done.
That sounds like a great idea, and you just about got the time exactly right.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Emily, for leading off. And I've been asked now to speak in terms of looking at things from a Christian perspective. And as you might already understand, we would not be able to read all the names. It would just be overbearing. And so the approach I'm going to take here, unlike Emily, I'm going to be talking a little bit more in generalities. One of the things that impressed me in terms of what Nancy set up in terms of what we're trying to accomplish in this webinar is that we're looking at how can we take our traditions within our religious context and then amplify having our people participate on Monday in a more civil ceremony recognizing Memorial Day. Back in 1971, the Congress, when they put together the 3-Day Holiday Act, ended up making Memorial Day the last Monday in May. And so as a result, it no longer falls on May 31st as it did for over 100 years. I think that is an interesting thing that Nancy came up with, because that means that we've been at worship immediately prior. Instead of Memorial Day simply being the first holiday of summer, the first long weekend, how do we help people do that? And speaking specifically from a Christian context now, I want to start off with a quote. Without memory, there is no culture. Without memory, there would be no civilization, no future. That was Elie Wiesel. As I was thinking about Memorial Day, we're looking at how do we remember? What's the importance of memory? And then bringing that into the Christian context within our theology, how important is memory to us? One of the things that we all, when we participate in the Lord's Supper, we think about Paul's words, do this in remembrance of me. That was Christ saying to his people throughout their history that when you observe this particular ordinance, this particular sacrament, you do it in remembrance of me. What's that remembrance about, and how does that apply then? How can we get that to apply in our congregational settings? When we remember somebody, when we keep remembrance alive, what we are actually doing is we're bringing into our present context that which is important from when that event happened. When we celebrate the Lord's Supper, we are doing this in remembrance because not only is Christ an historical figure, but Christ now is present with us in a very real sense. When we remember something, and the idea of remembrance has three different things. One, a monument. What's that monument do? It brings back to us the reality of what happened. It can be a speech, a ceremony, bringing back to us the reality of what happened. It can be a keepsake or a memento, bringing back to us reality of what happens. We have to be careful, I believe, when we're in a Christian context to not slip over into being nationalists in terms of how we celebrate Memorial Day. And one of the reasons I say that is that I think that is very appropriate when we're participating in a public setting to be focusing particularly on those individuals who have fought and died from the standpoint of the United States. And so it's our soldiers, our sailors, our Marines, and others who have given themselves up. But when we're in a Christian context, what is one of the key things that we have that we believe? And that is that all souls are precious in God's sight, that all of the folks that have died in a conflict are really ones that we should be remembering, because war is something that is evil in the very concept. Now, again, from a Christian concept, we have just war theory. We know that we will participate in war. We know that lives will be lost. But when we're remembering, when we're thinking about that from our context, should we not be thinking then in terms of the totality of the disaster and be able to look at it from God's perspective? All people have been created in the image. And so that means whether they were the protagonists, whether they were the innocents, whatever it might be. Now, how does that work out? Well, first of all, in a Christian context within our setting, I think it's very important for us to know the facts. And so as an example, if we want to talk about war dead, and particularly about recent war dead, we're looking at the two conflicts that we are in. Particularly in Afghanistan, and this is coming out of the Cost of War project from Brown University, which was the results were put out about 4 or 5 months before we pulled out of Afghanistan. At that point, their best estimate was that in the conflict in Afghanistan, there had been 2,442 Americans who had perished. And so on Memorial Day, those are the folks that we want to remember. But when we're looking at it from our context, how many others were there that perished? And the total was about 241,000. Now, 241,000, that means that the American deaths in that conflict were basically 1% of all that were killed. Of those 241,000, civilians numbered 71,344 to the best of our knowledge. Now, if I'm speaking from the pulpit and I want to talk about remembering, I want to make sure that I'm able to remember all of those whose lives were taken as a result of this. It doesn't make it right that some of these folks are terrorists and they were thinking about killing others. It doesn't make it right that some of these folks were dishonest. It doesn't make it right that they were going to attack American service members and kill them if they had the chance, and as a result, they were killed instead. What is the truth is these were lives that were lost, and we are to remember them because they're all precious in God's sight. Now, some other things that we may think about that we would do in our context in terms of worship that we might not do within the civic context. We could look at the congregation and we could remind the congregation of how many of the folks that are here have been impacted by those who have died as we remember. We could ask any of those who may be Gold Star families, that is, families who have lost a loved one, if they're comfortable to stand up, to identify themselves so that we can see. Here are some people that experienced that death immediately in their own setting, and to be able to see what that is. We could then also ask if there are some others who are veterans and have them stand up. Now, this is not Veterans Day, but yet every single veteran that's probably present has been impacted by somebody who died in the military, either directly or indirectly. We could then talk a little bit about what's happening within the total context. There's a story that I like to use when I'm talking on Memorial Day. It comes out of World War I. If you go to Belle, France, and you go to the cemetery in the village, which is right across the street from the American cemetery that houses or where the people who died in Belleau Wood were buried, you'll find an American grave there. It has an American flag on it. The individual buried there is Ernest Stricker. He fought in the Battle of Belleau Wood. He survived. 10 years later, he came back. The war still raged within him. They found him on the battlefield having committed suicide 10 years later, sadly, the American Monuments Commission, the Cemetery Commission, had closed the battlefield. And so they weren't sure what to do. The people of France opened their arms and allowed him to be buried in their village cemetery. Each year on Memorial Day, the folks who take care of our cemetery go across the street and ornament his grave the same as what they do the ones who are in the cemetery. Now, I say that because I think that sometimes when we're thinking about Memorial Day, we're thinking about those folks who have only died on the battlefield or died on active duty. We have literally thousands who continue to die each year as a result of being consumed by war. When we're looking at Memorial Day, I think it's very important for us to remember just how important it is that we are taking care of not only those veterans, but also their families. And so in the context of worship, within the context of that community, we can be freer to acknowledge how these impacts have happened and how it is that we go forth from there. Now, some other things that we may want to do in order to have people as part of it. As we all know, sometimes in worship, it can be a little bit dull, so let's have them participate. Up until 1971, when it became officially Memorial Day, prior to that, it had been referred to often as Decoration Day. That's where it started. What was decorated? The graves. How were they decorated with flags? Well, how about then in our worship service, having poppies or some other flower available so when people come in, they can take it as a visible representation of being able to mark this day in a special way. How about when they're leaving, if we, instead of just have people dismissed, if there's a columbarium, either in your sanctuary or another place where you've recognized those who have died, how about coming outside and then gathering together one more time as a matter of motion and movement and community, and they're having a special prayer as we think about the events that will happen tomorrow, because most of us are worshiping on Sunday. Memorial Day is going to be celebrated on Monday. How about if we bring in some of the other things that are going on in terms of Memorial Day? Each year, the President of the United States releases a message. We could reference that, reference it in a way that is appropriate in terms of us being citizens, and also then pray for the leaders of our country, especially as they would make wise decisions about whether or not we would engage in future conflict. There are many, many ways that we can move forward in terms of remembering folks. The other thing that I would suggest is that two of the themes that we may want to approach on Memorial Day is, number one, the theme of remembrance, as I've already said. We're remembering those who've died. We're keeping them alive in order then that we learn from the past. The other thing that I think that we do is that we also not just remember, but we become aware. And that is making awareness something that's there. Right now, we have 18 million veterans that live among us. If you go back again to the war, the conflict that occurred over 20 years, somewhere between 2 and 3 million Americans participated, some of them twice or more, in terms of their time in Afghanistan and Iraq. How many of us are aware of that when we're walking down the street? How can we have our people be especially sensitive to what the impact of that is on our nation? Well, we can do it by helping them understand what's going on. We can do it by referring, for example, to some of the suicide statistics that the Department of Veterans Affairs puts out. Suicide rates have actually dropped among veterans. They've gone down, but they're still somewhere around 17 per day in 2020. If you start looking at the rates, the second leading cause of death of American women who are veterans, who are the age of, I think it was 23 to 30, is suicide. Amazing that that's how much of an impact it has. And to allow our folks to see that then they can become involved in terms of helping to support, and to realize that there are many things that as a community of faith that we can reach out. In other words, our service on Memorial Day can be a service both to remember as well as to challenge, and to allow folks to understand that this is one of the places that we should be together with the community on Monday, and that we should be either at the cemetery, we should be In the parade, we should be someplace where we are truly mourning those who are lost, remembering them, and then being aware of what we can do as we go not only through Monday, but on through the rest of the year. So some ideas on how we might be able to stimulate our folks to be better involved as Christians on the day prior to Memorial Day. Thank you.
Thank you both, Emily and Lyman, for some outstanding presentations and sharing from the different perspectives and faiths about Memorial Day. For the Islamic community, this is not a common practice to recognize Memorial Day. It would be most of us American soldiers who have served would be most tied to this type of observance. And so looking at this, I am hopefully introducing a lot of new ideas to our community as we move forward to make sure we practice something very important for people who serve, as well as their families. And, this goes back as far as America has been here as a country. Case in point, just last week in Camden, South Carolina, I'm here at Fort Jackson, South Carolina, there was a recovery of remains of 12 Revolutionary War soldiers. And a lot of effort was put into recovering those remains, putting them in caskets, honoring them here on Fort Jackson, and then laying them to rest in marked graves in a cemetery in Camden. So the emphasis on the honor and the emphasis on the care and the remembrance, as was mentioned earlier, is paramount to help heal and restore some sort of balance back into people's lives who have loved ones who serve, but no idea what happened to them in that service. They just know they never came home. And so taking this to the Islamic context, I'm drawn to a verse that says, my prayers, my sacrifice, my life, and my death are for God, the Lord of the world. So a religious person, a person who believes, who then serves, and they believe this verse that's revealed in the Quran, they understand that to live for God and God alone is important and must be realized before they serve, because if they die, they want to die in service of God. In another verse that's tied to that, we're told, which gives me hope, think not of those who were killed striving in God's way as dead. They are alive and with their Lord, and they have a special rank. What is this rank? It is the rank of taking the next step, serving and being willing to die for your country. Now, sometimes we do that, we make that sacrifice, even when our country isn't living out the ideals that we all wanted to live out. But yet people do it anyway. People step up to the challenge in hope that their service and their sacrifice is going to one day be a difference maker in our country, growing into what it wants to, the values that it wants to have for all of our people. So as a Muslim community, we understand that many of us have served, many of us have passed away, and there's a void there that we don't regularly recognize. And so listening to both the Jewish and the Christian community and some of the ways that you have started to honor and recognize memorials, we are looking forward to implementing some of that. They're on a very small level that is happening, but it needs to be much more inclusive in terms of planning and preparing to do some observances here in the future. So just reflecting upon and finding the best ways to do this, which is a ministry itself, just going out and talking to people and making them aware of, for instance, what was mentioned earlier, how Memorial Day began. It began here in South Carolina. So that's anybody in this community here at Fort Jackson, they should have some real, pride in practicing this memorial service for the fallen, because it started here. The group of people who it started with, there was nothing to go off of. They just knew instinctively that something needs to be done so that we could remember those who have lost their lives in this war for all types of reasons, as Lyman pointed out, but were never given the proper burial. And as a religious community, especially in our own Muslim community, that's important. That gives meaning to that life, that sacrifice. And so it is important now, moving forward, that after this webinar, that we move forward into a better understanding of how to incorporate this into our communities, as well as how to work with other communities and see what they're doing to make sure we do our due diligence to recognize the fallen. As you may know, I'm coming down off of a high from the end of Ramadan. And so it was shifting gears to start talking about memorials for me. But because it's so important and it's so needed, and it's an opportunity for our country to heal in a different way when we come together to recognize people who have lost their lives. Just a quick tidbit about the Tomb of the Fallen, so Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. In 2021, it became 100 years since that was started. And again, there was no precedent. It was just a soldier who arrived back here from war. And there was no name, there was no community, but somebody saw it to be important to honor that soldier. And after him, 2 more soldiers from different wars were honored. And so now there's 3 tombs, but those 3 tombs recognize everyone and gives us the spirit of recognizing and remembering everyone who's lost their life and there was no ceremony for it. So when that guard is guarding those tombs, it symbolizes, I think, what we came here today to highlight, and that is it's very important, of course, to take the time as religious leaders to remember those who are fallen. That's all I have. Thank you for your time.
I want to thank the 3 of you for really thoughtful and different reflections that I have. So first of all, I want to offer you the opportunity really to engage each other, and points that maybe another made, or that you see connections between your observations and theirs. So please talk amongst yourselves.
Well, Lyman, I have a hard time calling you that. We don't know each other. I feel like I should say sir nonetheless. But then who would I be talking to? It's hard to know. Pastor Smith, you mentioned that one of the purposes of remembering is to make present, which reminded me of a teaching from the head of my rabbinic program, Richard Levy of blessed memory. He said, he taught us that the root in Hebrew that gives us the word yizkor, for instance, the root there also gives us the words for to make present. So if you were trying to make something present in the moment, you would use the same 3-letter Hebrew root as you would to say to remember somebody. So that notion of the point of remembering something has, well, I don't know what the cause and effect there, or the chicken and the egg is there, but it has a root in Hebrew as well. So just wanted to add that. And then my other thought, Chaplain Raheem, is that the tomb of the unknown soldier, I think, reminds us of the responsibility that we have as Americans. As I said in our conversation, our preparatory conversation yesterday, but if we are going to send folks to war, we need to remember when they don't come back. And I think as a nation, we do that monument-wise, in a public space like the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. But then how do we do it when we are thousands of miles from Arlington Cemetery, and how do we get that into the home congregation of fill in the blank place in America? So I think that is the still to be determined topic that we're discussing today. How can we do that in a shared moment, or shared time of remembrance?
Want to go first, Lyman?
Yeah, I very much appreciate you're bringing in, Emily, some of the roots that are there, because language is so important to us. And oftentimes we look at a word and we don't take the time to really figure out or remember what it means. And I think in this particular case, that is crucial. And as you reminded us of, Ibraheem, you're coming off from Ramadan. You've been through that month and have been improved by it. How much it is that we live in our own stovepipes in terms of faith and not understanding the other celebrations that there are, the other observances that there are. We may see them on a superficial level, but we don't see them internally. And I think when we look at Memorial Day, it sometimes is good then not only to prepare our folks to be part of the civil celebration, which needs to be a civil celebration. It is looking at our nation. But sometimes wouldn't it be nice if we then, just like we do some other times of the year, have some inner religious understanding of Memorial Day? How much more fruitful that would be to help us understand across different faith traditions. And as we heard today, both from Emily and Ibraheem, I think that as Christian communities, we would do well to maybe actually set up and engage in interactions so that when we're talking about something as important as memorializing, remembering, how do we look back? How do we understand who these folks are? It would be great to do that. I'm going to share 4 verses here because I think that they apply right now. It's from an obscure passage. I don't know that anybody can quote from Ecclesiastes 9, but here we go. It's 9:13. I've also seen this example of wisdom under the sun, and it seemed great to me. There was a little city with a few people in it, and a great king came against it and besieged it, building great siege works against it. But there was found in it a poor, wise man, and he by his wisdom delivered the city. Yet no one remembered that poor man. But I say that wisdom is better than might, though the poor man's wisdom is despised, and his words are not heard. I found that I was looking, at different ways I remember it, and I thought, what incredible wisdom that is. And on Memorial Day, and and again, Emily, fantastic that within a Jewish context, you're able to look at all these names, that the poor man's wisdom, and in this case, maybe not the poor man, but the forgotten man or the little person, because of people who die in combat that we're remembering are, generally speaking, the lower ranking folks that don't have names, that don't have reputations, that don't have that. Their wisdom is despised because it's not remembered. And here we are on this particular day, able to remember and then not despise them, but rather to lift them up. And how much better if we can do that across some of the stovepipes that we otherwise live in. Just some thoughts.
Thank you both. I think the invitation that Emily extended to us is brilliant, and same with Lyman. And I think if we could come together to put some like minds together, the sky's the limit in terms of what we could accomplish in that regard. And the spirit of the Tomb of the Unknown is right exactly the way you put it, Emily, in terms of taking the responsibility, even though others may shy away from it. And so, I can't think of a better way to look at it as, as religious leaders, is, feeling obligated to do something to make things better than we found it. And so I hope I'm answering your question, but just finding, wonderful verses that inspire people to get in gear and get involved and figure out ways to make things better in our communities. It's just an outstanding idea.
Are there other responses to each other? I'm going to pose a couple of ideas. One of them in the faith communities in which you three participate, I'm thinking about not only remembering the veterans who have died, especially those in service, but I'm also thinking about their families and the ways in which that particular day of worship and this National Remembrance Day has a particular poignancy for them. And also those who did come home from battle on that National Day of Remembrance are flooded with memories. Not sure how it is they managed to come home, and those they came to love, which I understand is a bond like none other in battle, did not. So in addition to remembering those who did not come home, those who gave their lives, I'm inviting your reflections about how in communities of faith we acknowledge those who live with a deep sense of loss that's particular. And sometimes the memories, especially for veterans who came home, might be very challenging memories, scenes of conflict in which someone beside them lost their lives, but not them. and living with those challenging memories. I think about the scene, one more point. I think about the scenes that we've sometimes seen on bases when the coffin of a fallen warrior is put aboard a plane to return to the United States, and the very solemn ceremony there to mark that life. But the ceremony is also for those who stand there remembering. So I wonder if you could now talk a bit about both, maybe first start with those who survived and come home. And then perhaps we can also be reflecting about ways our communities of faith, our diverse communities, might also be mindful of the families that might still be a part of that congregation, but are in other ways all around us. Perhaps, not carrying a sign that says, my father, my uncle, my mother died in whichever conflict. So let's talk a bit about the folks who survived but live with the pain, live with the difficult memories.
Well, Nancy, my first thought is, wouldn't that be a super powerful Memorial Day ceremony if people did wear that sign? Right? I am not, and especially in settings where it is a father, a spouse, a best friend, and not as in other settings, and we have both of them probably represented on our call today, where it's a grandparent, right, or a great that it's been a little while since anyone from their family has been involved in service. So my first thought was maybe we should need the signs as a as an opening something gambit in getting to the solution here.
Now, one of the things that I've been involved with, as you acknowledged, is a veteran military-friendly congregation program. And that is certainly a ministry that extends across all denominational and faith barriers. We have folks across the board because it's not a theologically, based thing. Every church, of course, is going to do it as they find fit. But at the same time, part of it is to address some of those things, Nancy, that you're talking about. One of the things that we really do encourage folks to do, and I think every community can do this, is, as you said, to be aware. And it's not simply the loved ones, and it's not even extended family. It's sometimes a high school classmate who joined the military, and you hadn't seen that person for years, and then you find out that they were killed or they committed suicide. One of the tragic things, I ran a story about this, picked it up from Australia. The Australian Chaplain Corps is moving in the direction to where part of their mandate is going to be to help members of the Australian military transition from the military and be in touch with their Veterans Affairs Department. Because, and we have talked about that here in America, simply because of the connection that chaplains have with military members, one of the highest trust communities that there is, and one then that can help with that ease. Part of, I talk about veteran suicides, the number of veterans who commit suicide who have no connection with the Department of Veterans Affairs. Well over half of those who commit suicides. It's gone down some, and we've seen some major developments with the PACT Act. But for faith communities to be better educated in terms of what the Department of Veterans Affairs offers, so that if they have a veteran walk into their service and they get to know this person and they befriend that person, they have some idea if there are issues. And sometimes it's not simply mental issues. It can be a lot of different things. But to have an understanding of how can I assist this person, walk beside them and get them involved in some of these community programs that are available. So I think congregational education can be very important. And there's always the potential of, reaching out to your local Veterans Affairs place and inviting the chaplain to come and be there some day of worship, whether it be Friday, Saturday, or Sunday, and to simply talk about that ministry, that people can be informed and realize some of these connections.
Mm-hmm. I like that idea. I also really like Emily's idea of having either some sort of flower or some sign that persons can choose to put on a jacket, a lapel, that indicates they are remembering the death of someone a veteran. I think that helps us to identify, to look around and see how many persons are remembering. So both ideas are helpful.
I'm sorry.
No, please.
Yeah, I was just going to say we do have a yellow ribbon as a symbol for the active duty community. We could expand that to something that reaches out to those who are not a part of the military community, and so that and like was offered by Lyman, that some sort of education and outreach to the surrounding communities would be a good way to begin to find out who else is there. But I along with that, there's an element of someone put it in the chat, survivor's guilt that exists, as well as a grieving process that never really was safe to begin. That we might open that door for people to find a safe place to begin that journey. So so all of those things could be ways forward in terms of reaching out to the families who are hurting from lives lost.
I think part of what I was trying to lift up is that I think anyone who goes to war is forever changed and carries not only the gift of the comradeship that is important to so many, but it's hard. Not many would come home untouched by the casualties of war. And I think the point that a couple of you made, it would be well if religious leaders took the initiative to identify who are the veterans in the congregation, or who are families that were touched by whose loved ones were affected by war, because they it's well to ask. They might be self-conscious about raising that to their religious leaders' attention. And I'm thinking particularly about, on this 20th anniversary of the war in Iraq and the poignancy of the fairly recent withdrawal from Afghanistan, there are folks from two different conflicts who have very tender memories, painful memories, that will, I would imagine, be particularly sensitive as we come to Memorial Day this year. So one of the other things I wanted to mention, let me just mention it in terms of some of the veterans. There are still survivors, certainly, of the Korean War, and a number of survivors of Vietnam. Some of these folks may be in retirement communities or at home, may not be able to come to worship any longer, and others are certainly in worship. But I'm one of the groups to whom I reached out for this webinar were chaplains in retirement communities, to be especially mindful as we approach Memorial Day, to invite conversation, to inquire. I hopefully already know who in that community would be a veteran. But it does seem to me that each of you you've mentioned the value of religious leaders and faith communities, knowing what families among them and what individuals among them are particularly affected by memories of war. I wonder if you have ideas from your communities to, to extend what I've tried to say here.
Well, what comes to mind from a Jewish context is that prior to or around the time of the high holidays, so the fall holidays of Rosh Hashanah, which is the start of the new year, Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, there is a tradition of visiting the grave of specifically parents, but really family members, and offering seasonally appropriate prayers, specifically at the grave, which I think takes it out of the context of the larger communal observance of those holidays and sort of the abstract idea of remembering people, and brings it specifically to the family's point of remembrance, right? The parent, not just the family, the individual's parent, spouse, etc. And so I wonder if there isn't something about that idea, not only of focusing attention by change of location, but then also when I think this is a Jewish thing, it may not be. When one visits a grave, one leaves a stone, a pebble, some sort of marker on the actual headstone. The idea being that by visiting, you are building up the memory of that person. And so you leave a physical marker, a memory of that person. So in fact, hearing about the origin of Memorial Day as Decoration Day, that to me is an obvious corollary, right? That we would visit the graves in a military cemetery, maybe not a military cemetery, but oftentimes the military graves are marked in a general cemetery with some symbol of military service, that we would specifically for Memorial Day mark and build up the memory of those of the individuals buried in those places. That to me is fits the idea here of building up the memory as opposed to letting it fade. That idea.
Another area that we haven't really touched on, Nancy, I think, is that lots of times I don't believe our congregations, and particularly congregations that don't have that much military as part of it, are aware of the various veteran service organizations, military service organizations, and others that are in the community. There is a lot of good work being done all the way across this country where veterans are helping veterans. One of the most productive things that has happened in some ways is the linking of Vietnam War veterans with veterans of AIDA, and being able to share across generations and build those bridges. I think congregations sometimes, if they leave it to the pastor, leave it to the rabbi, the imam, to be the one who reaches out and does these things, that individual doesn't have the capacity to really be able to do it. And so a great thing for congregations to do if they want to really be involved in helping not only their military members, but families. There's, National Association of Military Families. There's Gold Star Families. There are all of these associations. But if a congregation wants to do it, they really need to have a layperson who volunteers, and it then is given authority, is given voice to be able to speak on behalf and to go out and make those connections. And I think it can be very, very helpful to the people within a congregation to help have somebody leading them in that direction. So distribute leadership is what it amounts to.
Makes sense.
And you had already mentioned the VA, but it's worth, mentioning again that most people are not aware of the VA in their area. And so just introducing them to the services that are there, and I guess dispelling the myths that if they go there, they won't have a good experience and things like that. It's a good way. And it's not just for the service members, but also the service members' families. And they have all kinds of programs there to help with some of these things.
Right. Including special programs for those who are caretakers of veterans, and and there are financial programs that are there and helpful so that veterans can receive care in a friendly environment, and it can help in so many ways. Absolutely. Thank you, Ibraheem, for re-emphasizing that.
I think another idea that occurs to me is responding to veterans, and I imagine families. My experience has been more in conversation with veterans whose memories of those who died, who were killed in battle, perhaps beside them, is also complicated by their feelings about that particular conflict. So, they might not have been willingly in Vietnam or willingly in Iraq, but they were there. Or when they got there, at least some who've served in Iraq tell me that it was different than they had understood it would be. So part of what they saw was not only or experienced the death of comrades they held dear, but the deaths of others that they found very problematic. And so it does occur to me that it's a complicated season for veterans and their families. Persons might have come home alive, but be very different people. And I've had occasions recently talking with veterans who talk about their commitments to giving back, or their commitment to service as a form of lament, working out their experience. In this case, it was Vietnam, but it could have been other conflicts. But so I guess part of what I'm thinking about with Memorial Day is remembering that both families and surviving veterans may really have loved who died beside them, and also have very complicated feelings about how that death happened, whether it should have happened. So I think being mindful of that might also help shape the range of ways that religious leaders and communities seek to be responsive in this season. I wonder if that resonates with some of your experience or reflections about the complexity of surviving war.
Yes, it does, Nancy. Thank you for sparking that thought. So there's so many layers of returning home for the service member, and then the family to reintegrate. And so there's an element of a faith community being a part of that reintegration to facilitate some of the harm and the recovery that needs to happen, the forgiveness that needs to be introduced, because the service member is struggling with all the loss and all the grief, and the family is trying to get to know a stranger again. And so there's so much pain and suffering that's associated with that coming home that goes unnoticed to the general public. And so people are struggling with that reintegration, and they end up with substance abuse, they end up with homelessness, they end up with suicide. So there's a lot there that we can contribute to as faith communities to help with that, because it's not over when they come home. There's still a lot to sift through and help, and I think the faith communities are a big part of that.
Mm-hmm.
Nancy, one of the things that you and I have discussed is the concept or the feeling that perhaps somebody's death was in vain. And I think that there was a lot of feeling of betrayal in terms of how we left Afghanistan. And just this past week, people were reading, the national intelligence, whatever it was, sees that Afghanistan is once again a place in which international terrorism is being supported and plotted and launched from. And so not only then do you have the people who witnessed the horror of war and lost a friend there, or lost a family member or whoever, but now, perhaps that question about from a national perspective, what are we doing? And then the feeling of betrayal from the very country that was seen as taking the life. I think that, again, that is a challenge for our religious leaders. I think it's a challenge for people who are in positions to where they can help people work through that from a moral standpoint, and understand that because in the present context, looking back, that maybe wasn't the wisest thing for our country to have done, it does not necessarily mean that that person's death was without meaning, and to be able to address those issues and to help. And that's not just for the individual, but also for the family members who maybe are feeling that way. So I think our communities, again, can be well informed of what the public discussion is, be well informed of what these consequences are, and then be willing to, and knowing their people, which is absolutely important, to be able to reach out to them and say, hey, I just read this and I imagine that's having an impact on you. And say, being proactive with the people that are within our care. As you said, Nancy, how do our chaplains that are serving in retirement communities know who the veterans are? Those sensitivities. And I think all of us who are leaders within communities of faith need to think about how important it is to be proactive and to understand some of these larger dimensions that could have a real impact on a person's perspective and, in fact, their faith.
And if I might offer, I'm not sure if this is a counterpoint, you'll let me know. Just that what you gentlemen have brought up are complex, year-round, ongoing family dynamics, healing of betrayal. I mean, that's a lot to fit into to try to address in a Sunday before, weekend before Memorial Day, holy day before Memorial Day service. And I think the first step for our colleagues who are wanting to do something for Memorial Day would be to just provide a sacred pause in a weekend that is otherwise the start of summer, barbecue season, buy a new refrigerator, et cetera, right? If there could just be a sacred 20 minutes of focus on, there are people who we love or have loved or have known or went to high school with, and maybe we didn't even really like them, but whatever, we went to high school with them, and they have given their life in defense of our country. And they did it because they were following orders, because their draft number came up, because, leaving aside all the politics, they agreed to do so. And so I think that just honoring that and giving some sacred pause in an otherwise pretty celebratory weekend could be very powerful for someone who maybe is dealing with all of those other things year round and really right now just wants to have a Memorial Day moment.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be my sort of counterpoint.
Well, I'm not sure I don't feel countered. I mean, in the sense of negative, as much as adding on. I think your point earlier about some symbol that would help the congregation be aware of persons they may have no idea have experienced themselves as being touched by war. And so I think that's one point that is really important. I think what Lyman raised a moment ago is the importance of congregations, the leaders of congregations being curious, and I don't mean in some sort of incidental way, but who in that congregation is touched by war, and inviting conversation, not on just Memorial Day weekend, but in visitation, maybe providing a time for conversation by those veterans or the survivors of those veterans or the children as survivors, but who's been touched by it in a way that more than that weekend, there's a sensitivity to what they carry. And I think some of the beginning, especially with Vietnam forward, the conflicts we've been in carry some complicated valence for many persons. And I know in the life of the Soul Repair Center, there have been veterans, career military, who have talked with me about how important it is for persons to realize it's not just this person that goes to war, but we as a country made a decision to go to war. And what kinds of responsibilities do we then carry for those whose lives are forever changed because of those decisions? So it's, I think, an opportunity for religious leaders, maybe a growing edge for some, to be quite intentional about knowing who those folks might be. And I think your point, Lyman, about veteran-friendly congregations probably includes some strategies related to that. And I think similarly in retirement communities, especially in more of assisted living, where some of the older veterans would likely be, finding out who they are, who are the veterans in those groups.
Yeah, just real quick, Lyman, an idea popped in my head as Nancy was talking, and what Rabbi offered, having established regularity that people can look forward to, I think helps in terms of they can prepare and plan to be a part of these observances. And so one of our roles and one of our responsibilities as community leaders is to get something in place where people can plan to be there and bring some of these challenges that they have.
Mm-hmm.
Amen.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And I think, again, that touches on the entire concept of being proactive in terms of taking care of special needs. Now, again, we're talking about veterans. The congregation obviously has to be aware of all of its people, but this is a special subset, and I think within the faith community, it can certainly be addressed.
I'm wondering, are there particular ways? I know there are VA centers for older veterans, but I'm also wondering about if any of the three of you know practices that may already be in place around that particular or approaching that day. Maybe not. I'm sure there are.
Approaching Memorial Day, Nancy? Or?
Yeah, for approaching that weekend.
Yeah, for Veterans Day, the Department of Veterans Affairs coordinates veterans or celebrations and recognition all the way across the country. There is not nearly that effort that goes into Memorial Day. Memorial Day, as we probably know, there will be a special event at Arlington National Cemetery, the Tomb of the Unknown. There will be a wreath laid by a senior government official, typically either the president or the vice president. And so there is that outreach. In addition, I would say that if folks are in touch with any of the VSOs that are, whether it be the American Legion, Veterans of Foreign Wars, some of the others, they're the folks who are really the leading edge within the communities that are helping to get ready and have those regular events. And again, those are not organizations that are out of reach of citizens, to be in touch with them and to know and to say what would be helpful and how can we help. And so I would say that it's more at the local level, but again, it's easy to find out at local level. I think I was trying to remember, I think it's one of the military, I was looking to see if I have it here. One of the military websites actually has a list of Memorial Day events that's already been programmed. Now they're going to be pretty high level because it's national, but that information is available and it's out there. It's in this day of age, we can do a little bit of a search and we're going to find it. It's not that hard.
Great. I want to go back to something that you all shared with me as we prepared for this webinar, and that is your concern for unclaimed remains and ways in which perhaps faith communities might be attentive to remembering these persons for whom no family received their remains. We have a few minutes, and I wonder if you'd like, there was considerable reflection about that when we were preparing for this webinar.
Yeah, one of the things, Ibraheem mentioned it today, the memorial service that they had for the Revolutionary War soldiers, and I think that was very important. I am familiar with, particularly there in South Carolina, around Columbia, how some of the leadership and some of the local organizations, local MOA organization in particular, has been able to help throughout the state of South Carolina to find cremains that are known to be of veterans, where there is no family member, there is nobody who is able to give them fitting memorial. And so these sorts of organizations then have gotten together, and oftentimes then when they do it, they may inter more than one person, but when it's been publicized, sometimes an incredible community event in terms of folks turning out. There is an issue because particularly with the fact that many of our veterans are homeless. We're decreasing those numbers now, but at the same time, a homeless person dies. and they may have a veteran card, but they have no contacts. And so the local funeral home who gets tagged to take care of the cremains, they may not know what to do. And so within communities, again, it's all at the community level. It's a matter of working with, going down and saying to, the mortuary, is this an issue for us? Finding out, and then being available to provide and getting the help that's needed. And so it is a ministry that can take place, and it is remembering. It's allowing that person to build. And I really appreciate, Emily, what you were saying in terms of building that memory, continuing to have that person have an impact and increasing as opposed to fading. That's something that communities can do. And it is an issue. I haven't kept up with the numbers on it, but at the same time, there are those sorts of opportunities that are available within communities.
Mm-hmm. We're near the end, so I just wanted the end of time, actually. So I just want to check and see if there are final thoughts you wanted to share before we conclude.
Just real quick on my end, both Lyman and Emily have shared some great thoughts on remembrance, and I just want to offer that the juxtaposed position of remembering is forgetting, and just helping people to understand that when we don't remember our fallen, that's essentially forgetting them, and the importance of remembering over forgetting seems pretty stark to me. And even someone who's not claimed, somehow, some way, trying to remember them as opposed to forgetting them just seems so much more of a better position to be in. Thank you.
Thank you. Emily, do you have last thoughts you want to share?
I have a couple of thoughts, but I'll choose one, which is that part of the memorial prayers that are offered on at various times, but on Holocaust Remembrance Day in the Jewish community is that even those people who are not directly connected to someone who died during the Holocaust, because entire communities were destroyed and there is no one to remember. So now it's a responsibility of the entire community to remember. And so it seems to me that there may be faith communities where there really is no connection to people who have died in the recent wars, people who have there must be some connection to Korea or Vietnam, but even perhaps not a direct connection. But that notion that we are all responsible for remembering and not forgetting makes us all responsible to offer some sort of memorial prayer for those people for whom there is no one to say it. And whether it's due to homelessness and a disconnection from family, or I know plenty of people in the military who are in the military because they do not want to be connected to their family of origin. And so who's going to remember them should they die in service? And I would say that it's every service member wears US on their chest, America or something like that. And so we all then have to be responsible for remembering.
Yeah.
Thank you.
There's folks in the audience who are affirming that observation. I want to express my thanks to you for making time and having prepared to enhance our reflections on ways to remember, to facilitate in communities of worship, and also as you raised, a couple of you in particular, ways for communities to encourage broader reflection. So I really want to express my appreciation for what you've shared here, and And I want to pass along to you the appreciation of many who are participating in the webinar for the creative ways that you've brought your ideas here. And thank you all for being with us. I wish you well, and watch for the next webinar coming forward.